first podcast episode. Podcast episode 1, The Arctic Frontier. Podcast title, Hidden Agendas, Oil, Ice, and Power in the Far North.
9, 7, 1, 5. 3, 9, 7, 1.
To our podcast series exploring some of the most intriguing and speculative topics of our time. In today's episode, we're diving into the Arctic region, a place of great strategic and environmental importance. Segment 1, The Arctic's Strategic Importance. Let's start by setting the stage. The Arctic has been a focal point of exploration and interest for centuries. With the ice caps melting at an unprecedented rate, new shipping routes are opening up, sparking intense interest from global powers. This region, once largely inaccessible, is now seen as a vital area for trade and resource extraction. Segment 2, Military and Economic Interests. As the ice recedes, the Arctic is becoming increasingly important for its resources and potential new trade routes. This raises questions about the motivations behind the heightened military presence and investments in the area. What are the implications of nations seeking to control these emerging opportunities? Segment 3, Speculative Scenarios. Now let's delve into some speculative scenarios. There's been speculation about extreme measures, such as the use of nuclear technology or environmental engineering, to manipulate the Arctic environment. While these ideas are controversial, they highlight the lengths to which some might go to secure strategic advantages. Segment 4, Historical Precedents. To understand the potential impacts of such actions, we can look at historical precedents. Environmental manipulation has occurred in the past, and examining these instances helps us understand the possible consequences of similar actions today. The question remains, what could be the long-term effects of such interventions? The Arctic frontier represents a complex intersection of environmental change and strategic interests. As the region continues to evolve, both in terms of its physical environment and its geopolitical significance, it's crucial to stay informed and consider the broader implications of any actions taken in this sensitive area. Frontier. Welcome back. Let's pick up where we left off with the Arctic frontier. Segment 5, Environmental and Strategic Implications. As we examine the impact of potential environmental manipulation, it's crucial to consider how such actions could affect global climate patterns and ecosystems. The Arctic plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate, and any drastic changes could have far-reaching consequences. Segment 6, International Reactions and Diplomacy. Countries with interests in the Arctic are likely to react strongly to any new developments, whether they're environmental or geopolitical. Understanding these reactions helps us grasp the broader diplomatic landscape and the potential for conflicts or cooperation. Segment 7, The Future of Arctic Exploration. Looking ahead, the future of the Arctic is uncertain. As technology advances and environmental conditions shift, new opportunities and challenges will arise. It's important to monitor these developments and consider their implications for global security and environmental health. Segment 8. To wrap up, the Arctic frontier is a microcosm of larger global issues, from environmental change to international competition. As we continue to explore these themes, we'll gain a better understanding of how strategic interests and environmental concerns intersect. This episode will explore the role of nuclear weapons in strategic planning and their potential impacts on global security. Episode title, Geopolitical Power Plays and the Future of the Arctic, Shipping Lanes, Military Intentions, and Global Fear. Welcome back to Hidden Agendas, where we explore the deeper, often unseen forces shaping our world today. I'm your host, Stefan James Peterson, and in this episode, we'll be diving into one of the most speculative but deeply fascinating geopolitical narratives of the modern era. The far-reaching implications of Arctic control, oil, military influence, and the possible future of humanity's hidden war against nature itself. Over the next hour, we'll discuss a broad range of topics, from oil production and nuclear tests in the Arctic to supply chain issues that might be pushing world powers to drastic measures. We'll question whether modern climate events, like the melting ice, are purely natural occurrences or part of a grand military experiment. We'll also dig into how militaries and governments around the world are playing chess with resources and territories, and we'll tackle what many people fear could be a modern Cold War in the making, especially with the rise of global terrorism and economic instability. The Arctic, untouched for so long, remote, a place of awe and terror, is now a frontier being fiercely contested by global powers. Nations are scrambling to claim new oil and gas resources as the ice melts, but the question we have to ask ourselves today is, how far are they willing to go? Is there a deeper agenda at play? Could it be possible that the US and other global powers are using experimental tactics, perhaps even nuclear tests, to accelerate the thawing of the Northwest Passage? Imagine a new shipping route, far north of Canada and Russia, cutting travel time between the Atlantic and Pacific, bypassing volatile regions like the Middle East and the South China Sea. If this were achievable, the impact on global trade could be monumental. But the question is, what price would be paid for such progress? And are the melting ice caps really the result of human-caused climate change or something more intentional? Begin with a bit of background. Historically, the Northwest Passage has been a mythical route for traders and explorers. Its ice-choked waters were impassable for centuries, and only with recent climate shifts has the passage become a real possibility for commercial shipping. But is the melting ice just a coincidence? There's been speculation, particularly from conspiracy theorists, that countries like the United States might be speeding up this process, using nuclear tests, for example, to break through the ice. Of course, officially this is denied, but let's entertain the idea for a moment. Could the US or another world power justify such drastic tactics as a means of securing a quicker route to Europe and Russia? After all, supply chains are the lifeblood of modern economies. And that brings us to today's supply chain crises. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed major vulnerabilities in global shipping, and the war in Ukraine further disrupted key trade routes. With supply chains under pressure, there is more at stake than ever for nations to secure faster and more reliable transport routes. This is where the idea of Arctic manipulation comes into play. Could military forces be acting in secret, shaping the ice flows of the Arctic in ways we can't imagine? Consider this. We've already seen the US government admit to experimenting with nuclear detonations underground and underwater in the past. The idea of using nuclear energy to reshape the natural world isn't far-fetched when you look at historical precedent. Project Plowshare in the 1960s was the US government's initiative to explore peaceful uses of nuclear explosions, including altering landscapes. Could similar tactics be in use today? Could nuclear detonations in the far north be aimed at reshaping shipping routes rather than at military targets? And how does this tie into modern geopolitical tensions? Scientists warn that ice levels in the Arctic have reached record lows. Military movements in the Arctic have raised concerns among NATO allies. Global shipping routes are increasingly at risk due to supply chain disruptions and political instability. Now let's shift gears for a moment. Another angle worth exploring is how these military activities, whether real or speculative, intersect with what many see as natural climate phenomena. Ice flows, volcanic activity, undersea thermal vents. There's no doubt that Earth is a dynamic, ever-changing system. But could human intervention, particularly by militaries, be amplifying these effects? We know that the Earth's axis has shifted over billions of years, affecting where sunlight hits and how climates evolve. Add to that the known volcanic hotspots, places like Hawaii, Ethiopia, Iceland, and the infamous Ring of Fire. These natural forces have long shaped Earth's climate, and it's entirely possible they are contributing more to climate shifts than we give them credit for. But what if, just what if, some of these environmental shifts we've seen in the past few decades aren't just Earth being Earth? What if they're part of a grand experiment, an experiment to manipulate climate, sea levels, and access to key natural resources? Faint beeping. Satellite transmission noise. That was looking at the broader picture. We can't ignore the role of major powers like Russia, China, and the US in Arctic exploration and exploitation. Russia, in particular, has been increasing its military presence in the Arctic, deploying submarines, building bases, and even planting a flag at the bottom of the Arctic in 2007. The message is clear: control the Arctic, and you control some of the most important resources and trade routes of the future. Meanwhile, China, although not an Arctic nation, has declared itself a near Arctic state and is eyeing the region for its economic potential. The U.S., with its foothold in Alaska, can't afford to be left behind in this new Cold War, both figuratively and literally. Then there's the question of nuclear weapons testing. While publicly, most nations claim to be in favor of disarmament and nonproliferation, the reality is far more complex. Nuclear weapons, while devastating, are also seen as tools of power, deterrence, and, potentially, control over nature itself. Could detonating nuclear devices in the Arctic have both military and environmental objectives? The evidence, while circumstantial, points to a web of interconnected agendas. By using nuclear detonations, not just as weapons, but as tools to terraform the ice, powerful nations could literally reshape the Arctic to their advantage, both for resources and strategic control. But what are the risks? Is it worth it? Would the environmental consequences be catastrophic? The delicate balance of ecosystems, the potential rise in radiation levels, and the geopolitical fallout, these are questions that demand answers. And they're questions the average civilian may not even know to ask. And we can't forget the rise in global conflicts and the role of military force in these calculations. In recent decades, we've seen an increase in both conventional and asymmetric warfare. As we discuss the speculative nature of military strategies and environmental manipulation, it's important to contextualize these ideas within the broader scope of global politics and climate science. The concept of terraforming or altering environmental conditions for strategic gain raises significant ethical and practical concerns. Consider the impact of such actions on international relations. If one nation were to use extreme measures to manipulate the Arctic environment, it would not only affect the immediate region, but could also lead to widespread diplomatic tension. Other nations would likely respond with their own measures, potentially leading to an arms race focused not just on weapons, but on environmental control. Host, this hypothetical situation touches on a deeper issue: the balance of power and the lengths to which nations might go to secure their interests. In times of crisis, whether it's a resource shortage or strategic conflict, the temptation to use drastic measures can become stronger. This could mean more aggressive tactics in securing trade routes, manipulating environments, or even direct military actions. In recent years, we've seen significant events that underscore the complexity of these issues. For instance, the 2008 financial crisis highlighted how interconnected and fragile the global economy is. Countries that experienced economic downturns, like Greece and Spain, faced severe financial stress, which in turn influenced global markets and political dynamics. Similarly, the Arab Spring and subsequent conflicts have shown how regional instability can have far-reaching effects. The rise of groups like ISIS and ongoing conflicts in Syria and Libya have created a ripple effect, influencing global security and humanitarian issues. In terms of global supply chains, the war in Ukraine has had a direct impact on energy prices and food security. The disruptions caused by conflict can lead to shortages and increased costs, which in turn affect economies worldwide. These issues underscore the importance of stable trade routes and secure resources. Addressing the idea of military influence on climate change and environmental conditions, it's crucial to consider how these actions might affect global warming. While traditional climate science attributes global warming to greenhouse gas emissions and natural cycles, speculative scenarios involving military activities add another layer of complexity. Could military actions accelerate environmental changes, or is this merely a part of broader climate trends?
Blowing debris, crops, plantations flattened. In Vietnam, at least 59 people are dead or missing, and
Furthermore, the manipulation of natural environments for strategic purposes raises questions about the ethical implications and long term consequences. The idea of testing nuclear weapons in the Arctic to create new shipping lanes, for example, poses severe risks not only to the environment, but also to global health and safety. In conclusion, while there is much speculation and complexity surrounding these issues, it's essential to approach them with a critical mind and an understanding of the broader context. The interplay between military strategies, environmental manipulation, and global supply chains illustrates how deeply interconnected our world is and how actions in one area can have cascading effects across the globe. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the potential intersections of military strategy, environmental manipulation, and global politics. These topics are challenging and multifaceted, but they're crucial for understanding the future of our world. Stay informed, question what you hear, and remember that the global stage is shaped by a complex interplay of factors. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious. Engage listeners with a thorough analysis of the speculative topics while providing context and encouraging critical thinking about the issues discussed.
No other rainbow sign, no more water, but fire next time. Put your hand on the plow. I've traveled around this country from shore to shore.